You ever have one of those moments that just rips you straight out of your sleep? For me, it was the screech of metal snapping at exactly 4:32 in the morning, a time I never thought twice about until it ended up stamped all over a police report. I sat up, heart racing, and through the foggy kitchen window I could just make out three shapes standing perfectly still on my porch. No words, just the heavy air of threat hanging around them like fog. Before I could even pull on a shirt, a stack of papers hit the door, and I was staring down at the kind of arrogant smirk you only ever see on someone who thinks they're untouchable. Didn't matter that I had no idea what was going on. The message was clear: back down or lose everything. That's the story of how my quiet life in Oakwood Heights turned into a front row seat for the wildest, most absurd legal brawl of my life. See, I'm David Mitchell, 32, law degree, collecting dust. Living solo in my late grandmother's house, a little patch of normal in a neighborhood where folks mostly keep to themselves. I never aimed to make waves. I paid my dues, kept the grass cut, painted the shutters the approved shade of whatever beige was in that year. As far as everyone else was concerned, I was just the guy who waved, nodded, and got his mail on time. Except for Margaret Thornwell, HOA president, queen of pastel skirt suits and real estate royalty, or at least she acted like it. She'd been running the HOA for 3 years, all manicured perfection and syrupy smiles that never quite reached her eyes. Everything was fine right up until I told her no. And yeah, that one word apparently set off a domino effect I couldn't have imagined. It all started when Margaret announced her Oakwood Heights community upgrade project. She pitched it like it was the second coming, a new community center, $200,000 from special assessments, temporary use of our yards for equipment. The catch: she wanted my garden as the main storage lot. Now my grandma's roses still bloom out front every spring. They remind me of her stubborn optimism. So when Margaret asked, all gentle and polite, I just told her no. Explained why, even thanked her for understanding, but her smile turned icy and flat in a heartbeat. She left with some throwaway line about finding another solution, but I felt the shift: something had cracked and it wasn't going to heal. Next thing I know, a notice lands in my mailbox: $200 fine for excess grass height. You know how ridiculous it feels measuring your lawn with a ruler at dawn. Turns out my grass was 2.1 inches under the 2.5-inch limit. I called Margaret, still trying to play it friendly, only to get stonewalled. Regulations changed last week. David, it's 2 inches now. Didn't you get the email news to me? Spent 2 hours whittling my yard down to 1.8, made it look like a golf green. 2 days later, another fine. Now it's too short. Can't win for losing, you know. That's when I started digging. Public records, HOA docs, board meeting minutes, whatever I could find. What came up was way past petty fines. Margaret had been tweaking regulations left and right, more than 20 changes in 6 months, all without the required votes or notices. She was running things like her own personal fiefdom. And then she started working the neighborhood slow poison style. Whispering to Mrs. Chin at the mailbox, hinting that maybe I was having trouble at work, maybe I was angry. Suddenly, neighbors I'd shared cookouts with crossed the street instead of waving. Community meetings popped up without my invite. New rules about noise lawn decor. When you could mow, it was like living in a different universe overnight. The real kicker: someone spray-painted "selfish" in red across my fence at 3 a.m. Security cam caught a silver SUV crawling past. Margaret's SUV. I called the police, but before Officer Martinez even arrived, Margaret was at my door, all, "Oh my goodness, what a tragedy." She had an answer for everything, right down to suggesting maybe I'd done it myself for attention. The cop looked at her, looked at me in pajamas, and I could tell who he believed. It's always easier to believe the person who looks like they're running for office than the guy clutching a coffee mug. Weeks passed, and then came the big one, a neighborhood meeting about the project. Everybody was there except me, until Mrs. Chen let it slip by accident. I walked in to see Margaret at the podium, spotlights, poster boards, and her in a mint green blazer that probably cost more than my car. She called me out by name in front of everyone, blamed me for holding the community hostage, and played a clipped recording of me saying, "You'll regret this decision." Out of context, it sounded like a threat, never mind that I'd meant her overreaching with rules. The whole room turned, whispers spreading. Margaret had orchestrated a perfect public shaming, and I was the main attraction. Days later, a fat envelope came by, certified mail, legal threats, claims of obstruction damages, up to $100,000, all on fancy letterhead from Thornwell and Associates, except the address was a UPS box, and the lawyer was her brother, a guy with a history of fraud and a law license in suspension. She wasn't just petty, she was running a full-on scam, and suddenly my little garden looked like the least of her crimes. Then came the night she crossed a line. 4:32 a.m., pounding at my door. Margaret, her fraudster brother, and a muscle-bound goon with bolt cutters. "We're here under HOA authority," she screamed. "I called 911, but they just started cutting my fence and measuring my yard like they already owned it." When the police finally showed, Margaret flashed fake documents and spun some tale about community emergency provisions. My copy of the HOA rules was buried somewhere in the closet, made me look like the crazy one standing there in a bathrobe shouting about conspiracy. As dawn broke, Margaret made her final pitch. "Sign over my yard or she'd ruin me. You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed, the mask slipping. And she was right about one thing: she didn't know who she was up against. Because the thing about pretending to be harmless, sometimes it pays off big time. Let me back up a sec. Turns out I wasn't just some schmuck with a law degree. I'd spent years as a federal attorney, the kind that gets a key card to Supreme Court files. The next morning, I dusted off the old suit, took the train to D.C., and started making calls that would flip this whole story on its head. Within hours, I had Margaret's real history, embezzlement, fake credentials, shell companies funneling that $200,000 into personal accounts. The HOA project was a front. The construction company wasn't even real. Margaret and her brother were siphoning off the cash, laundering it right out from under everyone's nose. That's when Mrs. Chen, who'd been avoiding me for weeks, showed up at my door with cookies and a confession. She was the one who'd sent me the anonymous email about Margaret's bank transfers. As a certified accountant, she'd seen through the numbers. Margaret had threatened her, said she'd ruin her with the IRS if she didn't play along. But Mrs. Chen still copied all the incriminating files onto a USB stick. Together, we roped in Mr. Johnson, the retired cop, who, as it turned out, had been undercover for the state fraud division the whole time. Right when I thought things were about to blow wide open, Margaret pulled her final trick, called my bluff, called Mrs. Chen's, tried to convince the whole neighborhood we were fabricating evidence. Even managed to wipe the USB drive, or so she thought. For 48 hours, it felt like checkmate. Until Janet Morrison knocked on my door with a badge from the SEC. Turns out I wasn't just fighting Margaret, I was staring down a nationwide racketeering ring. The community improvement scam was just one piece of an operation stretching across 5 states tied to organized crime, and my refusal to fold had just tripped their last wire. That's when the real plan started. Janet and her team wired up the community center, staged a meeting where I pretended to finally surrender, played the defeated homeowner in front of the whole neighborhood. Margaret strutted around like she'd already won Johnson, and Mrs. Chen played their parts, and meanwhile every word was being beamed live to the FBI. As soon as Margaret started answering questions about the construction company, the shell accounts, and her brother's history, Janet stepped out, badge and all, backed by 3 agents in tactical vests. Margaret, her brother, and the crime family's local fixer all left in handcuffs, and the entire neighborhood sat there in stunned silence, jaws on the floor. It took 3 weeks, but justice rolled in like a freight train. Margaret got 18 years in federal prison, her brother 15, the crime family's inside man even more. The FBI recovered all the stolen funds, refunded every neighbor, and for once, Oakwood Heights didn't just survive, it thrived. Johnson became the new HOA president for 1 year only. Mrs. Chen reformed the books, and every new rule now has to be read out loud on camera with all of us watching. Nobody holds power here alone anymore. Now my backyard is a community garden, sunflowers and roses, a plaque for my grandma, and a promise that we don't let fear win. We throw block parties, kids run wild, and for once neighbors actually talk to each other, not just about each other. I never wanted to be the guy who made headlines, but sometimes life shoves you out front whether you're ready or not. Looking back, all that drama started because I refused to let go of a garden, but really it was about never letting anyone scare you out of standing up for what matters. So yeah, I'm still in Oakwood Heights, still working legal cases out of my home office, but now everyone knows me as the neighbor who took on the system and won. You know what I mean? Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it just looks like a stubborn guy with a mower refusing to back down. Now let's hear it. Was I right to fight, or should I have just mowed the lawn and played along? Drop your take below. I bet this neighborhood's not the only one with skeletons buried under a rose bush.